Julian Croft thought a skyscraper was built of glass and dreams. I knew it was built of steel and math. He was about to learn the difference, right in the middle of a $500 million presentation. My name is Nancy Ortiz, and at 35, I've become the invisible foundation of Ethelred and Partners, one of Chicago's most celebrated architectural firms. While our star designers sketch poetic skylines, I'm the one who makes sure those poems don't collapse in a high wind. I am a senior technical architect. It's a title that sounds important until you see my workspace. It's not an office. It's a territory, a small corner of the third floor tucked behind the large format plotters and the archives room. The air here smells constantly of toner and old paper. This is prime real estate for someone who prefers the clean logic of building information modeling to the messy politics of the boardroom. For the past 8 years, I've been the one they bring in when a design is too ambitious, a budget too tight, or the laws of physics too inconvenient. I'm the firm's secret weapon, the BIM virtuoso, a nickname I've only ever heard whispered when people think I'm not listening. To my face, I'm usually just, "Nancy, can you make this work?" followed by a request that is never simple and always on an impossible deadline. I find the efficiencies hidden in structural grids. I write the algorithms that optimize a building's energy consumption, and I build digital models so detailed you can track every single bolt from procurement to installation. The problem with making incredibly complex systems run smoothly is that people begin to think the work itself is simple. They see the elegant final blueprints and the stunning 3D renders, and they assume it was all born from a flash of creative genius. They don't see the 100-hour work weeks spent running seismic simulations, the custom parametric families I build from scratch in Revit, because off-the-shelf components aren't efficient enough, or the material science papers I read at 2 a.m. to find an alloy that can shave 3% off the steel budget. What they especially don't see is how I've been passed over for the director of design position twice in 3 years. Each time, the feedback from our CEO, Marcus Thorne, was frustratingly similar. "Nancy, your technical skill is unparalleled. You're indispensable." Indispensable. A word that sounds like a compliment but feels like a cage. "But for this role," he'd continue, "we need someone with strategic vision, someone who can inspire clients." Inspire. That was code for "you're not a charismatic man who can sell a dream over a 3-martini lunch." The morning everything changed began with the familiar scent of ozone from the plotters. Marcus called a firm-wide meeting in the main gallery. Unexpected meetings meant one of two things: a massive layoff or a career-defining opportunity. The nervous energy in the room suggested the latter. "The Solstice Tower," Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the quiet buzz. "We've made the final round." A collective gasp went through the room. The Solstice Tower wasn't just a project, it was a legend in the making. A 90-story, $500 million skyscraper aiming to be the first LEED Platinum-certified super-tall tower in the city. Winning it wouldn't just put us on the map. It would redraw the map with Ethelred and Partners at the center. My heart started beating a steady, heavy rhythm. This was it. This was my chance to prove that engineering and sustainability were the heart of modern architecture, not just an afterthought. I had been quietly researching advanced photovoltaic glass and geothermal heating systems for months, hoping we'd get this shot. I had ideas, real, tangible solutions that could make this building a masterpiece of both form and function. 2 days later, Marcus called me into his office. The view of the Chicago skyline from his window was breathtaking, a constant reminder of the world we were trying to shape. "Nancy, great news," he said, his smile wide. "You're going to be the technical pillar for the Solstice Tower pitch." Pillar, there was that word again. Supportive, structural, but ultimately buried. "You'll be providing all the technical support for our lead design architect." I kept my voice even. "Who's leading the design?" "Julian Croft," Marcus beamed. "We just brought him over from a rival firm in New York. The man is a poet of space, a true visionary capable of selling dreams." Julian Croft, I'd seen him. 30, maybe 31. Dressed in impeccably tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with a portfolio full of beautiful concepts that seemed to defy gravity. He had been with the firm for all of 2 months. "He has no experience with high-performance sustainable buildings," I stated, a fact, not an accusation. Marcus waved it away. "That's why he needs you, Nancy. You'll build the models, run the simulations, create the technical drawings. Julian will craft the narrative and handle the client." It's perfect synergy. perfect synergy. I was the steel skeleton. He was the glittering glass facade. That afternoon, Julian sauntered over to my desk. He leaned against it, his expensive cologne invading my space. "So, you're the detail drone," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. I saw a junior architect nearby look down, embarrassed. "I prefer senior technical architect," I replied, my voice cool. He chuckled. Right. Look, I know you're the numbers person. I'm more of a big picture guy. I'll handle the genius, the vision. You just handle the boring stuff, make sure the whole thing stands up." The boring stuff. The same boring stuff that had won us the Helios building contract by proving our design was 10% more energy efficient than the competition's. "I'll need complete access to your models as you build them," he continued, his tone shifting to one of command. "Daily updates. I need to internalize the data before I can sell the vision." "Of course," I said. I already knew how this story would end. 8 weeks of my life poured into creating a work of engineering genius just so he could claim it as his own. As he walked away, I felt that familiar sense of resignation. But this time, it was mixed with something else. A cold spark of anger. Julian Croft was about to learn that in a skyscraper, the boring stuff is the only thing that matters. The next 7 weeks were a blur of 18-hour days, fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer determination. While Julian was at client engagement lunches and inspirational workshops, I was in the digital mines. I built the Solstice Tower from the virtual ground up. I developed a proprietary algorithm to optimize the building's structural grid, cutting the required steel tonnage by an unprecedented 20% while actually increasing its seismic stability. I designed a closed-loop water recycling system that would provide 40% of the building's non-potable water needs. The energy model alone took me 2 weeks, a labyrinth of thermodynamic calculations and solar path simulations that proved we could achieve LEED Platinum certification. Julian's contributions were predictable. He'd swing by twice a week, glance at my screen full of complex structural diagrams, and say things like, "Can we make the lines on the west facade a bit more lyrical?" Or, "The client will love the sizzle of the design, Nancy. Make sure the technicals support the sizzle." He didn't understand a single calculation, but he spoke about my design and my model with growing confidence in our team meetings. Then, on a Friday night in the 7th week, I found it. I was doing a final data backup on the company server when I noticed a new folder, protected by a password I easily guessed, Solstice Final JC Master. My curiosity turned to ice in my veins as I clicked it open. He had duplicated everything. Every model, every calculation, every drawing. But these weren't just copies. He had systematically scrubbed my existence from the project. He used a script to change the file properties, replacing my name with his as the author and modifying the creation dates. My detailed technical notes, the ones explaining the logic behind my choices, had been rewritten in his flowery, pretentious prose. He'd even tried to disguise my custom Revit families, the digital components I'd built from scratch, by renaming them. He was planning to present my work, my soul, as his own creation. Rage was my first reaction. A white-hot, blinding rage. My second was to print everything and march into Marcus's office. But as I sat there, the only person in the cavernous, dark office, a different feeling took over. A cold, crystalline clarity. He thought I was just the detailed drone. He thought my work was just a series of numbers he could copy and paste. Then I saw his fatal mistake. I opened his master cost analysis spreadsheet. In his attempt to make the numbers look even better, to show Marcus he was a budget genius as well as a design visionary, he had changed a single value in a single cell. He'd swapped the material specification for the high-strength steel alloy I had designated for the core structural columns with a cheaper, standard-grade steel. He probably thought it was a minor tweak to save a few $1,000,000, but my model was a completely integrated ecosystem. That one change triggered a catastrophic domino effect. The simulation models still ran, the numbers still populated, but they were now fundamentally, dangerously wrong. His version of the Solstice Tower was no longer a marvel of engineering. It was a $500 million death trap, and then I saw the final piece of the puzzle. In his arrogance and technical ignorance, he hadn't copied my source files, my custom material libraries, and parametric families. He had simply linked his master model to my original files, still sitting in my project folder. If anything were to happen to those source files, if a single link were to break, his entire, stolen presentation would collapse into a heap of digital rubble. He hadn't just stolen a blueprint. He had stolen a loaded gun, pointed it directly at his own head, and was now asking me to help him pull the trigger. A slow smile spread across my face. Oh, I would help him. I would absolutely help him. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't rage. I worked. With cold, surgical precision, I documented every piece of Julian's intellectual theft. I took timestamped screenshots of his master folder, showing the file creation dates were less than an hour old. I took screenshots of my original files, showing a 7-week history of meticulous work. I compiled the email thread where I sent him progress updates and the Slack chat where he'd casually written, "Got the structural model. Looks solid, 3 weeks ago." I forwarded everything to a private, encrypted email address, creating an evidence trail that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. But the real work began when I dove deeper into his corrupted masterpiece. Julian hadn't just changed that one steel specification. In his clumsy attempt to make my work appear to be his, he had altered dozens of smaller variables. He tweaked the R value of the insulation panels, thinking he was improving thermal performance, but instead created a conflict with the HVAC system's load calculations. The dynamic dashboard I built to show energy savings now pulled from the wrong dataset. The specifications for the glass facade, he'd swapped my high-performance triple-glazed panels for a cheaper alternative, ensuring the building would now fail its LEED Platinum certification. He had created a perfect storm of errors, each one hidden just beneath the polished surface of my original design. And the truly beautiful part? They weren't obvious glitches. The model still opened. The 3D renders still looked breathtaking. The numbers in the spreadsheets still added up. But under the slightest bit of professional scrutiny, under the kind of questions an experienced engineer would ask, the entire proposal would unravel like a cheap suit in the rain. I found his magnum opus of incompetence on what would be slide 12 of the presentation. It was the dynamic simulation toggle, the feature I'd built to demonstrate the building's resilience in different weather scenarios. He had tried to streamline my code. Instead of linking to my carefully calibrated physics models, he had hard-coded values from an early, purely aesthetic draft. The moment anyone tried to run a live simulation, they wouldn't just get an error message. They would get a catastrophic and visually spectacular failure. Friday morning, I arrived at the office early, a thermos of strong black coffee in hand. Julian was already in the main conference room, rehearsing. Through the glass wall, I watched him pacing back and forth, clicking through my slides, practicing his visionary hand gestures. He saw me and waved me in. "Nancy, perfect, just in time. Want a sneak peek of the final show?" I walked in, my expression a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality. "Sure." He launched into his performance with gusto. When the investors came to us, they weren't just looking for a building. They were looking for a statement. His words were smooth, his delivery confident. He had spent his time memorizing the script, not understanding the subject. "The structural innovations I've developed here," he said, gesturing to a cross-section of the building's core, "represent a paradigm shift in skyscraper design. The innovations I've developed. Not we, not our team. I've." "Impressive," I said when he finished his run-through. "You've really mastered the complex technical details." He preened. "Well, once you grasp the fundamental logic, the rest just flows." "The fundamental logic," I repeated. "Of course, I did notice you made a few adjustments to the material specifications." A brief flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Just some optimizations, minor tweaks to enhance the final numbers for the client." "Enhanced numbers, right?" I said, stepping closer to the screen. "Like with the curtain wall assembly. That's an interesting approach." He shifted his weight. "It's a standard industry alternative." "Is it?" I feigned curiosity. "Because it looks like you're using a glazing system with a lower solar heat gain coefficient. That would significantly increase the cooling load on the upper floors. I'm sure it's fine, though." I cut myself off. "The renders look beautiful, that's what matters." "Exactly," relief washed over his face. He had no idea what I was talking about. "Look, Nancy, I really appreciate all your support on this. You've been helpful." Helpful. 8 years of expertise, 7 weeks of my life, and I was helpful. "Happy to help," I said, my voice sweet as poison. "Actually, Julian, I wanted to thank you." He blinked, confused. "Thank me?" "For taking the lead on this. I know I'm not really cut out for the spotlight. Some of us are just better suited for the background, doing the boring technical drawings while people like you handle the important, visionary stuff." His smile returned, wider than before, completely missing the razor's edge in my voice. Hey, we all have our strengths. You're great at what you do. Not everyone can be a design lead. So true, I'll just stick to my lane. That's the spirit, team player. He checked his expensive watch. I've got to run. Final prep meeting with Marcus. The big show is Monday at 10 a.m. Maybe you could be on standby just in case any, nerdy technical questions come up. I'll be there, I promised. As he packed his laptop, I added one last thing, my tone casual. You have backups of everything, right? All the source files, the material libraries? He waved a dismissive hand. It's all in my master folder, triple password protected. We're golden. Golden. He had no idea. I spent the rest of the day quietly preparing my masterpiece. I created a new presentation folder, the real one, with the clean, functional, and accurate models. Then, I went back into my original source files. The material libraries and parametric families that Julian's stolen version still desperately depended on. I didn't delete anything. I didn't corrupt them. I did something better. I embedded a few simple validation scripts, little tripwires of code that would lie dormant and invisible. They would only activate under one very specific condition: if someone tried to run a live physics simulation without the proper administrative credentials. My credentials. My trap was set. The weekend passed in a state of deliberate calm. While Julian was likely practicing his power poses in front of a mirror, I was preparing myself. I bought a new blazer, a sharp, charcoal gray suit that radiated quiet authority. I rehearsed my own talking points, not for a presentation I planned to give, but for the questions I knew would arise from the wreckage of Julian's. Monday morning arrived, gray and drizzling, the Chicago sky the color of wet concrete. I got to the investor's downtown office at 8:30, a full 90 minutes before showtime. The conference room was on the 50th floor, a glass box in the sky that screamed power and money. I set up my laptop in a discreet corner, connecting to the guest Wi-Fi, a small precaution. Julian arrived at 9:15, a vision of tailored confidence. He saw me and nodded. Glad you're here for backup. He didn't notice that I had said nothing about being his backup. He strode to the head of the massive oak table and connected his laptop to the 80-inch screen. I watched as he opened his stolen deck. My corrupted calculations loaded silently, a digital time bomb waiting to go off. At 9:45, the room began to fill. Marcus came in, flanked by two of our firm's partners. They were buzzing with excitement, ready to toast their new star. At 9:55, the investors arrived. 6 of them, led by their CEO, Eleanor Vance. She was a woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for being tougher than reinforced concrete. I'd read her biography. She had started her career as a structural engineer. At 10 o'clock sharp, Marcus began the introductions. When he got to Julian, his voice swelled with pride. And leading our design is Julian Croft, the creative mind behind this truly groundbreaking vision for the Solstice Tower. Thank you, Marcus, Julian said, standing. He smiled his million-dollar smile at the investors. What we're about to show you isn't just a building. It's the future of the Chicago skyline. He clicked to the first slide. My design, my data, his name watermarked in the corner. The first few slides went by without a hitch. Julian was a polished performer, weaving a story about light and air and community. The investors nodded, taking notes. Then we reached slide 8, the cost analysis. Eleanor Vance leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. Mr. Croft, your material cost estimate seems optimistic, about 15% lower than the industry benchmark for a structure of this complexity. Could you explain that variance? A bead of sweat trickled down Julian's temple. Of course, he said, his voice a little too loud. It's a result of our highly optimized design process. Eleanor made a note, her expression unreadable. Julian, sensing danger, quickly moved on. He navigated through the next few slides, his words coming faster now. He was rushing toward his grand finale. Slide 12, the dynamic simulation. And now, he announced, his confidence returning, I'll show you the true genius of this design. Its resilience. Let's simulate the tower's performance in a 100-year storm event. He clicked the button to run the simulation. For a second, everything looked fine. The 3D model of the tower appeared on screen, majestic against a stormy sky. Then, as the simulated wind speed climbed, a spiderweb of red lines erupted across the building's core. Alarms I had programmed, silent until this exact moment, flashed across the screen in bold, crimson text. Critical stress failure, material specification mismatch, catastrophic load imbalance. The entire room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the projector. The beautiful tower on the screen was no longer a symbol of the future. It was a digital warning of imminent collapse. Julian stared, his mouth hanging open. He clicked the mouse frantically, but the red warnings only grew brighter. That's when Alina Vance spoke, her voice as cold and hard as the steel Julian had tried to cut from the budget. "Mr. Croft," she said, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Your model appears to indicate that the Solstice Tower would suffer a catastrophic structural failure at a wind speed of 120 miles per hour. Are you proposing that we build a $500 million death trap in the heart of Chicago?" Marcus Thorne shot to his feet, his face the color of ash. I think we need to take a brief recess." His eyes darted around the room, finally landing on me in the corner. A desperate question burned in them. He cleared his throat. "Nancy, could you please join us up here?" The 5-minute recess felt like an eternity. The investors filed out to a private lounge, their faces grim masks of disappointment. Julian remained frozen at the head of the table, staring at the screen of his laptop as if it had personally betrayed him. Marcus Thorne was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, his superstar protege now looking like a billion-dollar liability. He finally stopped and looked at me, his eyes pleading. "What the hell just happened, Nancy?" "His model is corrupted," I said, my voice calm and steady. "The material specifications are wrong, the load calculations are inaccurate, and the physics simulations are linked to a faulty data set." I didn't say how or why. I didn't need to. When the investors returned, Alina Vance's expression made it clear she was ready to end the meeting. But Marcus, to his credit, stepped up. "Before we continue," he announced, his voice regaining a sliver of authority, "I want to clarify the leadership structure for this project. Nancy Ortiz, our senior technical architect, will now be leading the technical presentation. She will also serve as the project technical director for the Solstice Tower, should we be fortunate enough to earn your trust." I saw a flicker of surprise in Alina's eyes, a battlefield promotion. She settled back into her chair, intrigued. "Very well, Miss Ortiz," she said. "The floor is yours. Let's talk about structural integrity." This was the moment. Not just to present data, but to demonstrate a philosophy. I connected my laptop, and a clean, accurate, and functional model of the Solstice Tower filled the screen. There were no flashy animations, no dramatic reveals, just engineering. "The issue wasn't the design," I began, looking directly at Alina Vance. "It was a fundamental error in the material specification for the core load-bearing columns." I pulled up a side-by-side comparison of the two steel alloys, showing the molecular differences in their composition and their vastly different performance under stress. My original specification, which this model uses, ensures the building can withstand wind speeds up to 180 miles per hour, 40% above the city's code requirements. The questions came, fast and relentless, not about aesthetics, but about substance. Torsional stability, foundation engineering, thermal bridging, HVAC efficiency. For every question, I had an answer, backed by data, simulations, and documentation in my appendix slides. When their chief engineer asked about my proprietary structural optimization algorithm, I didn't give him a high-level summary. I opened the Revit model itself, pulled up the backend logic, and showed him the actual code. "This is unusually transparent," Alina commented, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Most firms guard their methodologies." "A great building shouldn't have secrets, Miss Vance," I replied. "It should have integrity from the foundation to the spire. You're not investing in a black box. You're investing in physics and mathematics you can trust." Near the back of the room, Julian had sunk into his chair, a ghost in a $1,000 suit. Marcus had subtly positioned one of our partners by the door. He wasn't going anywhere. The presentation, which was supposed to be 30 minutes, stretched to 90. The investors' questions shifted from skeptical to engaged to collaborative. Alina Vance actually smiled when I demonstrated how the building's integrated systems would allow them to sell excess solar-generated power back to the city grid. Finally, she closed her notebook. "I think we've seen enough," she said. "Miss Ortiz, this is exceptional work. Frankly, it's the most robust and intelligently engineered proposal I've seen in a decade." She stood, and her team followed her lead. "We will, of course, need to discuss this internally, but I can say with confidence that you will be hearing from us. Marcus," she added, turning to him, "you have a remarkable asset in Miss Ortiz." "We're just beginning to realize that," Marcus replied, his gaze flicking toward Julian for a split second. As the investors filed out, Alina paused at the door and looked back at me. "One question, Miss Ortiz, why weren't you presenting from the beginning?" I chose my words carefully. Sometimes the strongest parts of a structure are the ones you don't see. She gave a knowing smile. Indeed. The door closed, leaving the three of us in a heavy silence. Marcus's phone buzzed. "Legal is on their way up, Julian," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "They're waiting in the lobby." As he was escorted out, Julian stopped in front of me. "How?" he whispered, his face a mask of disbelief. "How did you know?" "I didn't know you would steal my work," I said, meeting his eyes. "But I knew if you did, you wouldn't understand it well enough to know why it worked. Next time you try to pass off someone else's expertise as your own, Julian, make sure you actually have some of your own." The door clicked shut on his career. "Nancy," Marcus said, clearing his throat. "I owe you a profound apology." "Yes," I agreed, offering him no easy comfort. "You do." His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and a genuine smile, the first I'd seen all day, spread across his face. "It's a leaner Vance. They want to move forward immediately. Full contract. Expedited timeline." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a newfound respect. "Congratulations, Director Ortiz. You just landed the biggest project in this firm's history." The weight of it settled on me, not heavy but solid. Real, visible. "Thank you," I said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a project to plan." As I gathered my things, Marcus added, "That promotion comes with a 50% salary increase and the corner office overlooking the lake. It's yours." A corner office. After 8 years next to the plotters, I was finally stepping out of the shadows, but I didn't smile, not yet. The work was just beginning. In the year that followed, the Solstice Tower began to rise from the ground, a testament to steel and math. My corner office became the command center, its windows covered not in inspirational posters, but in structural diagrams and energy efficiency charts. Word of Julian's spectacular implosion and my subsequent triumph had become a quiet legend in the Chicago architectural community. He'd been fired, of course, and after failing to find work at any reputable firm, had reportedly moved back east to consult independently, code for unemployed. My own trajectory had been the opposite. I was made a full partner at Ethelred and Partners. I built a team of young, brilliant technical architects and engineers, mentoring them to value substance over style. We became the most profitable and sought-after division in the firm. One evening, Eleanor Vance called me directly. "Nancy," she said, her voice warm, "I've been reading your paper in the Journal of Structural Engineering, the one you published under your own name this time." She was referring to the research I'd once published under a pseudonym. "My offer still stands. The R&D lab is yours whenever you're ready." "I appreciate that, Eleanor," I said, looking out my window at the steel skeleton of the Solstice Tower, now reaching the 30th floor. "But I have a promise to keep first." A few weeks later, a text message from an unknown number popped up on my phone. "Hi Nancy, it's Julian. I know it's been a while. I wanted to apologize for what happened. I was out of line. I've done a lot of thinking. I'd love to buy you coffee sometime, pick your brain." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then, without a reply, I deleted it and blocked the number. Some foundations, once cracked, can't be repaired. He hadn't learned a thing. He still wanted to pick my brain, to absorb my expertise without doing the work. My healing didn't come from his apology. It came from the quiet hum of my computer running a new simulation, from the respect in the eyes of the young architects I mentored, from the tangible reality of a skyscraper rising against the sky. He had called me the detail drone, meant as an insult, but he'd been right. I was obsessed with the details, because in architecture, the details are the difference between a masterpiece and a disaster. He hadn't understood that in the kingdom of steel and glass, it's not the person who sells the dream who holds the power. It's the person who controls the blueprints. The best revenge wasn't watching him fall. It was building something that would stand long after everyone had forgotten his name. The numbers never lie. They just wait for someone to listen. And I was finally in a place where everyone was listening.